Okay, Shabbat Shalom. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for connecting today to this Torah portion. As we continue speaking about Joseph, remember, this is the last Torah portion of the book of Genesis or Bereshit. So it means we'll be starting next Friday a new book, which is the book of Shemot or Exodus. So today, if you're reading from a Hebrew Bible version, the Torah portion starts in Genesis chapter 47, verse 28, or chapter 48, depending on your Bible. And it's called Vayechi, which means, and he lived. But before we do that, let's say the blessing for the Torah. And it says like this: Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with your commandments and commanded us to engage ourselves in the words of the Torah. Amen, amen, amen. So going to the Torah portion, remember that last time we had Joseph revealing himself to his brothers, letting them know that he is Joseph. And now he's eager to have his family come back, and they'll come back and settle in Goshen. And now is the time where Jacob is about to die, and so he wants to bless his children. And it says in verse 28, now Jacob lived Vayechi in the land of Egypt for 17 years. So the days of Jacob, the years of his life, were 147 years. And we've talked before that the number 17 is the numerical value of the word Tov. Tov, T-O-V, which sometimes is translated as good in English, but really means more. It means that it's complete, that there's completion of life, that Jacob has basically fulfilled his role, his purpose, and his function during the 17 years. In other words, God has rewarded him with his last years of life with happiness, having all his children with him and living in an excellent place in Egypt. So he dies of 140 years old. Verse 29, as the time of Israel's death drew near, he called for his son Joseph and said to him, if I have found favor in your eyes, please put your hand under my thigh and show me faithful kindness. In the Hebrew is the term chesed and emet, chesed and emet. And this was a custom, this was a way, a tradition of making an oath. She says, please do not bury me in Egypt. When I lie down with my fathers, you must carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burial place. So he's asking Joseph to please swear to him, make an oath that he will be taken back to his family in Canaan to be buried with his family. So he said, I myself will do according to your word. Swear to me, he said. So he swore to him. Then Israel bowed down in worship on the head of his staff. Now, some people under the commentaries think that this is a way of Jacob honoring Joseph for taking the oath. And not only that, remember that in one of the dreams that Joseph had, his father also bowed down to him. So it's possibly this what he was doing, or he was also bowing or honoring God, and seeing that God fulfilled the promise that he made him, that Joseph would close his eyes at the time of his death. So chapter 48, verse 1 says, after these things, which in the Hebrew, the way it's mentioned, sounds like at the end of times, someone told Joseph, behold, your father is sick. So he took his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, with him. When someone told Jacob, saying, behold, your son Joseph has come to you, Israel summoned his strength and sat up in the bed. So now see the transition from Jacob to Israel. Why? Because remember that when the name of Israel is mentioned, it means that he's in a higher spiritual state than when he's called Jacob. Verse 3, then Jacob said to Joseph, El Shaddai appeared to me in Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me. He said to me, I'm going to make you fruitful and multiply you and turn you into an assembly of peoples. And I will give this land to your seed after you as an everlasting possession. So now your two sons who were born to you in the land of Egypt, before I came to you in Egypt, they are mine. Now, something that's interesting is that you never read in the Bible the term adoption. there's no name for adoption in the Hebrew language. Even today, it wasn't until like the 20th century that they came up with a word similar to adoption, but it's a concept that is really not done or understood the way today we see adoptions in the Western world. But here in the ancient Near East, the term is not used, adoption, but the language are formulary languages of adoption during this time. And when several things have to happen. First, that the person that's adopting has to name the individuals that are going to be adopted, has to name the individuals. Here he names Manasseh and Ephraim. Number two, the person has to say, they are mine. They are mine. And you have to remember that during this time, most likely, since Jacob is blessing his children, he started out with Joseph, maybe all the other brothers are there as witnesses, or maybe Joseph is accompanied by officials. Egyptian officials was also work as witnesses to what Jacob is saying. So by mentioning the names of the boys and saying that they are mine, that is already a legal way of saying that I am adopting these children. Ephraim and Manasseh will be mine, just like Reuben and Simeon. Number two, he mentions his two older sons, which is Reuben and Simeon. Why? Because by saying this, he is equating Manasseh and Ephraim to Simeon and Reuben. He's not displacing them, but what he's saying legally is that now Manasseh and Ephraim are going to have the same status as his natural born children, Reuben and Simeon. And why he mentions Reuben and Simeon? Because they are the children of his first wife. So in this time, a way of saying that you were adopting children, you had to mention that these children that are being adopted are equal in status to the children born to your first wife, because the first wife always had priority over any other wife or concubines that could be that the person could have married. Verse 6, any descendant of yours whom your father after them will be yours. In other words, any other children that Joseph had, those are going to be his. But now Ephraim and Manasseh are being legally adopted as part of the tribes of Israel. They will be identified by the names of their brothers for their inheritance. So now these children, there's going to be children that are going to be in terms of inheritance according to Joseph and his Egyptian wife. And then there's Manasseh and Ephraim that are going to inherit according to Israel, to the tribes of Israel. Verse 7, now as for me, when I came from Padan, to my sorrow, Rachel died along the way in the land of Canaan while we were still a distance from entering Ephrat. And I buried her there on the way to Ephrat, that is Bethlehem. Another thing that we're going to see is that the name of Jacob or Israel is going to be put upon Manasseh and Ephraim. So the things are that he has to declare that they're his children. Number two, say their names. Number three, that they are equivalent in status, like a natural born son, likened to Reuben and Simeon. Number four, they have to be in accordance with his first wife's children. And number five, that they have to have the name of the person that is adopting them. So that was a formula or an adoption ceremony, the way it was understood in the ancient Near East. Verse 8, then Israel saw Joseph's sons and said, who are these? Joseph said to his father, they're my sons whom God has given me here. Now there's the question, why does he ask this when he's just talked about adopting them? So one of the commentaries say is that maybe he was confused because of his age, or maybe because he couldn't see any longer. Remember that the same as his father Isaac couldn't see, now Jacob cannot see either. But we need to understand that there's no question in the Bible that's not significant. On the contrary, when he makes this question, he really wants to know who are these young boys as men, as individuals, what's in them that I need to know about. Because another thing we need to remember is that Manasseh and Ephraim at this stage are not children, they're young adults. They're probably in their 20s. Okay, so they're not really young adults, or I mean, they're not young children, they're really more like young adults. Verse 9, Joseph said to his father, they're my sons whom God has given me here. Then he said, please bring them to me so I may bless them. Now Israel's eyes had grown heavy with old age. He could not see. So he brought them near to him and he kissed them and hugged them. Then Israel said to Joseph, to see your face I didn't expect. And look, God has let me see your offspring as well. Then Joseph took them from his knees and bowed with his face down to the ground. He's honoring his father. And by taking the young men or the young adults from his knees, he's basically transferring his ownership or his fatherhood to these young boys to Jacob, because another way of saying adoption was to say that the children were born on his knees. Verse 13, then Joseph took the two of them, Ephraim with his right hand across from Israel's left, and Manasseh with his left hand across from Israel's right, and brought them close to him. Now remember that the right hand was understood as being the hand of blessing, as being the hand of authority, as being the hand of power, as being the hand that represents justice and righteousness. So he puts Ephraim in front of him on Joseph's right side, which basically he's giving him the priority because he's placing Ephraim on the right side, but Ephraim is on the left of Jacob. Okay, so Joseph is expecting that Jacob is going to put his left hand over the head of Ephraim and his right hand over the head of Manasseh. But what happens? It says, but Israel stretched, verse 14, but Israel stretched out his right hand and placed it upon Ephraim's head, though he was the younger, and his left hand upon Manasseh's head, crossing his hands, though Manasseh was the firstborn. Now you have to also remember that Jacob was the younger son and he received the blessing. So he's giving the same blessing that he received as the younger one, younger than Esau, to Ephraim. Then he blessed Joseph and said, the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has shepherded me throughout my life to this day, the messenger, remember that the term should not be angel, but messenger. In this case is what's Hebrew called Sar Hapanim. Sar Hapanim, which means the prince of the presence, or the prince of the Shekhinah, or the prince of the covenant, which we know is Yeshua, but Yeshua is not called by the name Yeshua during this time, because his function and role and his purpose is different than when he's called Yeshua. So the messenger who redeemed me from all evil, may he bless the boys and may they be called by my name. That was another formulary for the adoption ceremony. And by the name of my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, may they multiply to a multitude in the midst of the land. Now that term multitude in Hebrew indicates that they multiply as fish in the seas, multiply as fish. And it's interesting that when Yeshua decides to call his disciples, the majority of them were fishers of men. So we see a connection between Ephraim being a multitude of nations that multiply like fish, and then again we see disciples being mostly fishermen. Verse 17, when Joseph saw that his father placed his right hand upon Ephraim's head, it was wrong in his eyes. So he took hold of his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's hand to Manasseh's head. Joseph said to his father, not like that, my father, because this one's the firstborn. Put your right hand upon his head. Why? Because remember that the custom was to give the firstborn blessing to the firstborn. But his father refused and said, I know, my son, I know. In other words, even though I can't see, I know the difference. He also will become a people and he also will become great. But his younger brother will become greater than he, and his seed will be the fullness of the nations. In the Hebrew is the word melo hagoyim, fullness or filled with life, the nations through Ephraim. Then he blessed them that day, saying, "In you shall Israel bless by saying, may God make you like Ephraim and like Manasseh." And we know that this is the blessing that on Shabbat, Friday nights, Jewish parents give to their sons. May you be like Ephraim and like Manasseh. And to their daughters, they say, may you be like Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. Thus he put Ephraim before Manasseh. And we need to understand that the name Ephraim is the name also given to the northern kingdom and also given to the 10 tribes that were separated from Judah. Remember that after Solomon died, his son became king, and because of taxes and issues, the 10 tribes that separated from the other two, from the total of 12, so 10 separated, and we have only Judah and Benjamin that become the southern kingdom. So the term Ephraim, or the name Ephraim, also refers to the northern kingdom and to the 10 tribes, or to the house of Israel. Now I need to make a parenthesis here, in the sense that when Ephraim, the northern kingdom, was exiled by Assyria, because they were exiled by Assyria and dispersed among the nations, we know that Ephraim, or the northern kingdom, or the 10 tribes, or the house of Israel, intermingle with many, many nations. And so the majority of them lost their identity. And even though they didn't know who they were still part of those 10 tribes. So by being exiled and being dispersed among the nations, they mixed with the nations. Many of them got assimilated and lost their identity. But that doesn't mean that the tribe of Ephraim, or the tribes, the 10 tribes, were lost. They were simply taken into the nations. Their descendants are part of those 10 tribes. And so therefore, even though they don't know who they are, many of them, God knows who they are. It's not that the nations have replaced Ephraim, or that the nations have replaced the 10 tribes. No, the 10 tribes will always be the 10 tribes. So we are not replacing anybody. We have just become descendants of many of those tribes. And eventually when Yeshua comes back, he will take care of that and will let everybody know who belongs to what tribe. But in the meantime, none of these tribes have been replaced. The church has not replaced Israel. Israel is still Israel. All the tribes are still the tribes, according to the names that God gave them. Therefore, they will also again be reunited when Messiah comes back. Verse 21, then Israel said to Joseph, look, I am about to die, but God will be with you and will bring you back to the land of your fathers. Now I myself give you one portion more than your brothers, that which I took from the hand of the Amorites with my sword and my bow. And even though he doesn't say exactly what area this is, in the Hebrews understood that is Shechem. Shechem, remember that Shechem was a place where Simeon and Levi killed all the men because of the rape of Dinah. Therefore, and he gives him this extra piece of land. Why? Because Joseph gets he gets the birthright. He gets the birthright and the firstborn blessing. Therefore, remember that the firstborn is the one that gets a double blessing and a double portion. And then in chapter 49, it says, Jacob called his sons and said to them, gather together so that I can tell you what will happen to you in the last days. Now, one thing we need to understand, that it was a custom that parents, especially the father, before dying, he would bless all his children. Now, Jacob here is going to bless, and it's not that he's prophesying over them, because it doesn't say anywhere that he's saying, Hashem told me to tell you this. He's speaking from his heart, and being the man that he is, he has an insight into the destiny of his children. Besides, he has the insight through the Holy Spirit to know about his children. So he's going to give them a blessing. And the purpose of giving a blessing was so that the family can continue in order. They can continue all the functions, and all the things related to the family can continue in an order once the father was no longer there. So the purpose is to maintain the family in order. So he starts saying all these blessings. So he says, gather together so that I can tell you what will happen to you in the last days. Be assembled and listen, sons of Jacob, and listen to Israel, your father. So he himself uses both his names. Verse 3, Reuben, my firstborn are you, my vigor and firstborn of my power, endowed with extra dignity, endowed with extra strength, like water boiling over. You will not have extra, for you put into your father's bed when you defiled a maid's couch. In other words, even though Reuben was the firstborn, he did not receive the blessing of the firstborn. Why? Because he encroached his father's position by going into Bilhah's bed. Now, some people say that he had relations with her, which in a way, he was telling Jacob, now I'm taking over because I'm the firstborn, which was encroachment and which was not the best way to do it because his father was still alive. So that's why Reuben lost his firstborn blessing. So even though he was born first, he did not receive the blessings. Verse 5, Simeon and Levi are brothers, instruments of violence are their knives. In their secret council may my soul not enter. In their contingent may my honor not be united. For in their anger they slew men, and in their self-will they maimed oxen. Remember that it was Simeon and Levi who led the slaughter of all the men in Shechem because they had raped Dinah. And so during that time, Jacob didn't say anything to them, but here he's taking the opportunity to tell them that he was never in agreement with what had happened. So he's saying in verse 7, cursed be their anger, for it was strong, and their rage, for it was cruel. Why was it cruel? Because of the way they killed the men. Remember, they were deceived. They had circumcised and had been circumcised. And then on the third day, they went in and killed all the men. But then again, they killed many of the oxen. Why did they kill them? I mean, they were so enraged that they didn't even have compassion over the animals. So their rage was so strong that's why Jacob is saying what he's saying. And then he says, I will disperse them in Jacob, I will scatter them in Israel. And we know that came about because Simeon was assimilated among all the tribes, especially the tribe of Judah. And then the Levites, remember, they were never given possession of the land, but they had 42 cities where they lived, and therefore those 42 cities were scattered all over Israel. Verse 8, Judah, so you are, your brothers will praise you. Your hand will be on your enemy's neck. Your father's sons will bow down to you. A lion's cub is Judah. So here, by saying that Judah is a lion, during this time, it was understood that the lion was a symbol of kingship, of royalty. So a lion represents a king. It represents his strength. So therefore, by saying that Judah is a lion, he's implying and letting know the other brothers that Judah is from Judah, that the kingship is going to go forth. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He crouches, lies down like a lion or like a lioness. Who would rouse him? The scepter will not pass from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet. So remember that the scepter and ruler's staff right there, those are symbols again of kingship. Until he to whom it belongs will come. Now in other translations, it says Shiloh. Shiloh is a name that's given to Messiah, but Shiloh can also be understood in Hebrew as saying to give tribute to him, to give tribute. And to whom do people give tribute? To the kings. So therefore giving tribute to the king is also in reference to the name Shiloh. And it says, to him will be the peoples, to him will be the obedience of the peoples, binding his foal to the vine, his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He washes his garments in wine, and in the blood of grapes his robe. Now we know that in Zechariah chapter 9, verse 9, it talks about Messiah coming in, the king coming in, and a donkey, which means humility, humbleness. And the reference to wine and the blood of grapes has to do that the wine and grapes were symbolizes prosperity, symbolizes having all the things met, not lacking anything. So it meant abundance, it meant fertility. His eyes are darker than wine and teeth that are whiter than milk. Again, even milk and wine, again, has to do with abundance, with prosperity, with fertility. Verse 13, Zebulun will dwell by the seashore and be by a harbor for ships. His distant border reaches Sidon. So Zebulun was a tribe that dealt with techelet. Techelet is the blue of the tzitzit. So remember those who are snails found in the sea, that's what they used to make the techelet or the blue of tzitzit, and other garments, especially the garments of the high priest, and garments that meant royalty. Issachar is a strong bone donkey lying down between two saddlebags. He saw that a resting place was good and the land was pleasant. He leaned his shoulder to bear burden and became a forced laborer. In terms of Issachar, the commentaries say that Issachar was a tribe that was dedicated to studying Torah, and the Zebulun, being a merchant, was the one that supplied finances to Issachar so that Issachar could dedicate themselves to studying Torah. And there's also a commentary say that at least 200 of Sanhedrin members were from the tribe of Issachar because they were very knowledgeable in times or in knowledge of calendars and months. So there were a great many of them that were part of the Sanhedrin. Verse 16, Dan will judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. And there we have the name Dan and judge or judgment, which is what Dan means. Let Dan be a serpent beside a road, a viper beside a path, who strikes a horse's heels so that its rider falls backward. And remember that Samson was from the tribe of Dan, so they think that these verses are in reference to Samson because he was one of the judges of Israel. Verse 19, Gad, attackers will attack him, but he will attack their heels, because Gad was known for their warrior skills. They were in the army. They were very skillful. Asher, rich is his food. He will provide delicacies fit for a king. Asher is associated with the olive oil, with richness of foods. And so that's why I mentioned that they provided delicacies fit for a king. Naphtali is a doe let loose who offers words of beauty. Virtue or characteristic of the tribe of Naphtali was that they were skillful runners. They ran very fast. That's why they're likened unto a doe. They were very swift. Therefore, when messages had to be sent among the tribes, they would send the men from Naphtali to send those messages because they were very, very fast. Verse 22, a fruitful son is Joseph, a fruitful son beside a spring. Daughters walk along a wall. The archers were bitter and shot arrows and were hostile towards him. Yet his bow was always filled and his arms quick moving by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob. In other words, now he starts speaking about Joseph, and he says that Joseph went through a lot of sadness and through a lot of bitterness, and yet, even though he had the opportunity and had the power, he never took revenge. He never took revenge of his father. He never took revenge of his son, of his brothers. And therefore, even though he had the power, even though he was in a position to do it, he never took advantage of that and took revenge against his brothers. From there, a shepherd, the stone of Israel, from the God of your father who helps you, and Shaddai who blesses you with blessings of heavens above, blessings of the deep that lies below, blessings of breast and womb. In other words, blessings from all over, from the heavens, from the earth, family, abundance of children, abundance of descendants. The blessings of your father surpass the blessings of the ancient mountains, the desire of the everlasting hills. May they be upon Joseph's head, upon the crown of the one set apart from his brothers. You have to remember that Joseph also represents Messiah ben Yosef. So all these blessings also refer to Messiah. And verse 27, Benjamin is a ravening wolf. In the morning he devours spoils, and in the evening divides plunder. It's interesting that it mentions here morning and evening, and we know that the altar of the temple was placed in the territory of Benjamin, because we have to remember that Benjamin was part of Judah. It was the only tribe that stayed with Judah. Therefore, when the altar was built, it happened to be exactly in the portion that belonged to Benjamin. Verse 28. These are the tribes of Israel, 12 in all, and this is what their father spoke to them. He blessed them. Each one he blessed was a suitable blessing, because he blessed them according to their virtues, to their faults, to their characteristics, because even though they were so diverse as brothers, yet together they formed a unit, the unit of Israel, the tribes of Israel, the land of Israel, the people of Israel, because remember that the purpose of all this is that all this diversity, the goal is to establish a home for Elohim here on earth. The purpose of all these things, of all these differences, is to be able to come together and together build a place for the establishment and the enthronement of God again on the earth. Verse 29, then he charged them and said to them, I am about to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, in the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, that is next to Mamre in the land of Canaan, the field that Abraham bought from Ephron the Hittite as a property for burial. There they buried Abraham and his wife Sarah. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah, and there I buried Leah. The field was purchased along with the cave in it from the sons of Het. When Jacob finished commanding his sons, he drew his feet up into the bed, then breathed his last and was gathered to his peoples. So he wants to make sure that they know exactly where he's going to be buried. He wants to go back to the promised land. He wants to go back where his fathers have been buried prior to him. Chapter 50. Joseph fell upon his father's face, wept over him, and kissed him. Then Joseph commanded his servants and physicians to embalm his father. So the physicians embalmed Israel. Now, even though it says physicians, it most likely is a priest of Pharaoh that were specialized in doing this process of embalming. Now, we know that Jews do not embalm their dead, and they definitely don't do cremation. Now, in this, why is Joseph allowing this? Because you have to remember that one of the commentaries say that men and women that are just, completely just, live a life of justice and righteousness, that their bodies do not decompose. And so Joseph, fearing that the Egyptians would see that his father would not decompose, that they would idolize him. That's one commentary. So he kind of said, well, let's do this so that he won't be idolized. Another is that, remember that they're going to take Jacob back to Canaan, and from Egypt to Canaan is a long way, and they're going through the desert, and the weather is very hot. A body that is not embalmed is going to be quickly decomposed, and it's going to be a bad way of taking someone back to their land. So therefore, embalming was a great way of preserving that body so it could be buried in Canaan. And it says they took 40 days for him, because that is how long embalming takes. In Egypt, wet 70 days. Now, according to Egyptology, it took 40 days to embalm in person. Why? Because what they did is they took out the main organs and put them in jars, and they put a solution that would dehydrate the organs, and they were kept in that jar, and these were jars that represented different gods. And then they would dehydrate the whole body with certain chemicals, spices, oils, and then they would wrap it in linen. Once they put back the jars within either the coffin or inside the body, wrap them, and they would place this person with they would put kind of like a sealant over the body so it would preserve it. Because according to Egyptology, what they understood is once the body was taken care of during this process and put into the coffin, that the soul would come back to the body. And therefore, many of these people were buried with food, with water, was there things that they favored, and that because they understood that in a way that the dead would come back to life. But in the case of Joseph, he allows this not because of those reasons, but because he has to take back his father to Canaan. And then why does it say 70 days? Because 40 days for embalming. And remember that mourning for the Jews is a 30-day process. When the days of formal weeping passed, Joseph spoke to Pharaoh's house saying, if I found favor in your eyes, please say in Pharaoh's ears, My father made me take an oath, saying, behold, I am about to die. In my tomb, which I dug for myself in the land of Canaan, there you must bury me. So now please allow me to go up and bury my father and then return. So he lets Pharaoh know that he made an oath to his father. You have to remember that during this time, honoring an oath was very important. So Pharaoh has no choice but to allow Joseph to go and take his father back to Canaan. Pharaoh said, go up and bury your father just as he made you swear an oath. So Joseph went up to bury his father. Also, all of Pharaoh's servants, the elders of his household, and all the elders of the land of Egypt went up with him, along with all Joseph's house, his brothers, and his father's household. Only their children and their flocks and cattle were left in the land of Goshen. Now, basically, we have an enormous amount of people going to the land of Canaan, along with Joseph and the burial of Jacob. One thing we can conclude or kind of think about is that because of Jacob was being such an important person, being the father of Joseph, that he was being honored almost like a king. And another thing is that maybe Pharaoh sent all his officials to make sure that Joseph would come back, because remember, Joseph had a very important position in Egypt. Verse 9, chariots and horsemen also went up with him. It was a very impressive company. When they came to the threshing floor of the bramble on the other side of the Jordan, they mourned there a very great and solemn lamentation. He observed 7 days of mourning for his father. Now that today in Judaism is called Shiva, the process or the lamenting for 7 days Shiva. Once a person is buried, then at home for 7 days, they mourn, the family mourns for the person once the person is buried. And that's called Shiva, which comes from the word Sheva, which means 7, for 7 days. And one of the things they do is that they cover their mirrors with a black covering. And so they, for 7 days, they're mourning any family member that has passed away. Verse 11, when the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, saw the mourning ritual at the threshing floor of the prickly bush, they said, a solemn mourning ritual, this is for the Egyptians. That is why it's named Abel Mitzrayim, which is on the other side of the Jordan. So Jacob's son did for him just as he commanded them. His sons carried him to the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave of the field of Machpelah, the field that Abraham bought as a property for burial from Ephron the Hittite next to Mamre. After burying his father, Joseph returned to Egypt, he and his brothers and all those who went up with him to bury his father. So they all came back. Remember, this can easily be a 3 to 6 month journey. So they all come back to Egypt. Verse 15, when Joseph's brothers saw that their father had died, they said, maybe Joseph will be hostile towards us and pay us back in full for all the evil we showed him. So they're still thinking that Joseph is going to take revenge for what had happened to him. Now that Jacob's not there, they say, okay, so Dad is not here. And Joseph was very close to Jacob. So therefore, he's going to take this opportunity to now take revenge for what we did to him. So they charged Joseph, saying, before his death, your father gave a command saying, thus you must say to Joseph. Now, this may be true or may not be true. But either way, they used this comment to try to make sure that Joseph understood what was happening in their minds. Please forgive, I beg you, the transgression of your brothers and their sin because they treated you wrongly. Therefore, please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father. Then Joseph wept when they spoke to him. Can you imagine, after all these years, he's been blessing them, taking care of them, providing for them. He thinks everything's fine. And now his brothers are still thinking that he's going to take revenge. And his brothers also came and fell down before him and said, they're still bowing to Joseph. Behold, we are your slaves. So they think that, well, instead of killing us, just make us your slaves as a revenge. But Joseph said to them, don't be afraid, for am I in place of God? In other words, who am I to judge you? Yes, you yourself planned evil against me. God planned it for good in order to bring about what is this day, to preserve the lives of many people. So now don't be afraid. I myself will provide food for you and your little ones. So he reassured them, speaking kindly to them. Joseph remained in Egypt, he and his father's household, and Joseph lived 110 years. It's interesting that 110 years of life was the ideal life that the Egyptians thought was the best life. To live up to 110 was the perfect life. But in reality, the Egyptians during this time lived maybe to 40 or 50. So maybe that's why Pharaoh, when he met Jacob, asked him what was his age, because he was very elderly. So 147 years to Pharaoh was supernatural, because 110, they thought that it was a supernatural way of living. So imagine dying at 147. But Joseph, he dies before all his brothers, and he dies at the age of 110, which is the perfect age according to the Egyptians. Joseph saw the third generation of Ephraim's sons. Also, the sons of Machir, Manasseh's son, were born upon Joseph's knees. This implies that Joseph adopted the sons of Manasseh, the sons of Machir. In other words, that he adopted his grandchildren like his father adopted Manasseh and Ephraim. Now, later on, I can't remember the verse, but it lets us know that descendants of Machir also were part of the tribes of Israel. Then Joseph said to his brothers, I'm about to die, but God will surely take notice of you and will bring you up from this land to the land that he swore to Abraham. Now, again, I think I've said this before, and only in the Hebrew can we understand this when he says, God will surely take notice of you. In the Hebrew is pakod yifkod. Pakod yifkod, which means visiting, I will visit you. Visiting, I will visit you. And this is important. Why? Because this almost becomes like a password from Moses, because when Moses comes to the leadership in Israel, in Egypt, when they're about to, they're crying out to the Lord, they're being oppressed. When Moses comes to them in Exodus chapter 3, verse 16, Moses says on behalf of the Lord, pakod pakadti, pakod pakadti, which means I have visited you. And this visiting is not like, going to a friend's house and having coffee or cookies and stuff like that. No, this visiting is, I have come to see what is your need. I have come to see how can I help you? I've come to see what's going on. So it's a visiting of concern, it's a visiting of to bring help and justice and righteousness. So when Joseph says this, God will surely take notice of you. And then Moses says the same thing. It's like a password that they know that this is truly a visitation from God. But God will surely take notice of you and bring you up from this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. So he gives them that hope that they will return to the land of Canaan. Why? Because that is a promise from the sovereign king. Then Joseph made Israel's sons swear an oath, saying, when God takes notice of you, in other words, when he visits you, when he comes to bring you out, you will bring my bones up from here. So Joseph died at 110 years old, and they embalmed him, and he was placed in a coffin in Egypt. Again, remember that from this point on, at least 200 years later, they're taking the bones of Joseph to Canaan, and those bones were wandering around those 40 years while they're in the desert. So it was important to have them embalmed, even though that is something that today the Jews do not do. Now, the embalming process of today is very different from what they did in Egypt. Today, they use formalin, a lot of chemicals, and a lot of things. And so, unfortunately, that kind of preserves the body longer than it should. So Jews are against that. And being this the last portion, Torah portion of the book of Genesis, we say, Chazak, Chazak, Benit Chazek. Be strong, and let us be strengthened. For what? So we can continue to the next book of the Torah, which is the book of Exodus or Shemot, that will start next Shabbat. And so we're going to take a few minutes. If anyone has any questions or comments, this is the time to ask. Anyone with any comments, questions? Let me put here the gallery. Anybody? Miss Linda, you need to open your microphone.
I had some, but you answered them.
Okay.
I could not understand why it said Joseph pulled them from between his feet.
Mhm.
You know, I said, these are men that are closer to 30 than they are 20, you know?
Yeah, they're older, but again, it's a form of saying that now that they have been adopted by Jacob, then Joseph is basically letting them go. They're not his anymore. They belong to Jacob. It's a language that's understood if you study the laws of adoption of the ancient Near East, especially the laws of the Code of Hammurabi. It has a lot of examples of situations like this. And so being born in the knees or being at the knees of a father means adoption. It's a way of saying adoption.
Okay. I knew it was an idiomatic expression.
Exactly.
I have looked all over, and all I had to do was go into Hammurabi's.
Yeah, the Code of Hammurabi has a lot of laws that are very similar to what's in the Torah. But the main difference is that in the Torah, there's no exception of people. God treats everybody equally and with equity. But the codes of all the other nations had social statuses and caste where they made differences between the rich and the poor, the slave and the free, where in God's eyes, everybody is equal. So that's the main difference with the Torah compared to the codes of all other nations, either the Hittites, the Ugaritic, or the Canaanites, or whatever. The difference is justice and righteousness.
Pastor.
Yes, ma'am.
You were giving us the steps and the manner of adoption in the Far East at this time. I think, I want to see if I have it right. Must name the children to be adopted.
Right.
Must say that the children are his and have equal power with the other brothers who are born of the first wife, if there's more than one wife.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
And that his name has to be upon the children.
Okay, I put name of Israel will be upon them.
Yes.
They're called by Jacob's name.
Yes.
And they multiply. This is something that you gave us. Is that all?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, because I put multiply as fish.
Yeah, but that's part of the blessing that Jacob gives to Ephraim, to Ephraim and Manasseh, but they'll multiply like fish.
And this is just me thinking as I was studying. I noticed that Jacob, when he started talking about his oldest son, when he started talking about the first one, he says, you're the beginning of my strength. You're the beginning of my perfection. And all the positive things. And if I'm wrong, tell me. And yet I think about all these young men that go out and impregnate young women and then have abortions.
Yeah.
Have they done away with their strength?
Absolutely.
That I said, I'm thinking this, God help me. I don't want to be crazy.
Absolutely, because that's the first fruit. The first fruit that comes from them. Therefore, yeah, they're basically eliminating that blessing of a firstborn, a first fruit. Absolutely. And that's why it's murder, and that's why in the eyes of the Lord it's a big no-no.
That is so deep.
Oh yeah. If people understood the things that they're doing, they wouldn't do them. But
so, Pastor, I don't care how many first children they have with another wife or another woman, they can never get that back.
No, never. If that child is aborted, that will never happen.
So his strength will never walk the earth.
No, because that firstborn, it represents that strength, that vigor, because it's the first fruit out of that body. Yeah.
I started not to ask my question because I thought I was just, I was praying, you know, we pray before we start studying. And when I was reading what he said to Reuben, I had to sit back and think.
I mean, it's powerful. I mean, people don't understand that. And when you say firstborn is not only a male, even if your firstborn is a daughter, is the same thing. Because that's the first fruit that comes out of your body.
I started not to say anything, but I said, I looked at my notes. I said, I need to get verification.
Well,
That what the Holy Spirit was telling me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And sometimes we can get confused and think we're thinking.
And even not that, not only that first child, but the first time you have sexual relationship with someone, the first time, part of your soul goes into that body. So that's why when people have too many sexual partners, it basically takes away from you, and you lose more and more of yourself the more you do that, because first of all, that's not the way it was meant to be. So if people understood that, according to the Bible, the first time you have a sexual relationship with somebody, that is considered marriage. But we know how things are today.
Yeah, but that, when I sat here, I had to go take a nap.
Yeah, I mean, when we take time to really engage ourselves in the Torah and the words and the teachings, it's so profound. But you have to take the time to do that, to meditate, to try to understand, to grasp all of it. It's context, it's language, it's everything. And it's so much. I mean, I've been doing a Torah cycle since 2003, and I'm always amazed of the things that I learn, of the things that I see now that I didn't see before. And there's always, God always gives you new revelation, because the word is alive. The word is food, is spiritual food. So when people say they don't get anything out of it, I don't get it.
But Pastor, I found out, because the first year we did Torah, and the second year we did Torah. I said, God, this is repetition. I said, but give me the freshness that's supposed to come with the word. Yeah. Every time I study. Absolutely. I'll go into lecture with Pastor Nereida. But this one blew me away today. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Oh, wow. That's the purpose of the cycles, because you get more each time you go through it. But people get bored because sometimes we don't do that prayer that you do before you start studying Torah. And then we don't ask. They don't want to take the time to go deep into the word. And it has to come from within. I mean, it's something that you need to desire. If you don't desire it, the Lord is not going to give you any revelation if you don't desire it, if you're not going to do anything with it. Because the purpose is to grow and to teach and to edify other people with what he gives you. Anyway. I mean. Anything else? I mean, the strength, the dignity. Yeah, all that, absolutely. I mean, and that's only a translation. I haven't looked it up in Hebrew, but I'm sure in the Hebrew I did. It's more than what you're saying there. Yeah, I did. I've got my Chumash here. So yeah, I went in because I said that's heavy, But Pastor, I noticed that when he talked to Simeon and Levi, he asked that his honor not be given to them. Because of the shameful act that they did with the Shechem. What they did there was they went overboard, basically. So yeah, that was a shameful act. Remember that when that happened, Jacob was, what have you done? All these nations around me are going to come and attack us, and they're going to hate us, and they're going to, because what they did was very shameful. They deceived these men. Even though what they did to Dinah, they shouldn't have happened, but still the young man wanted to marry her. But what they did, they went above and beyond their anger and their rage. They just were too cruel. I mean, so he didn't want that shame of that incident upon him. Basically,
That's the way I understand it.
I understood that very plainly today. He didn't want it upon him or Abraham or Isaac.
Yeah,
You know?
because that's not the way that the Lord deals with people. I mean, unless the Lord gave you, like he did about the nations of Canaan, that they were destroyed completely because of all the immorality and idolatry, you know, but nowhere does it say that God told them to do that. You know, that was their own race. That came from them. It was them doing this act that was, which could have been dealt with a different way. But, you know, killing a whole, all the men of a whole city, you know, that's, and then the animals had nothing to do with it. But yet they were so enraged that they even killed the oxen. It was very cruel. So therefore, yeah, Jacob says, hey, I don't want to have anything to do with that.
Wow.
Because remember that this is an honor shame society, which means that whatever you do that's honorable affects everybody. The same thing, anything that you do that's shameful affects everybody. So that's why Jacob says what he says. Anything else?
Pastor,
Yes, ma'am.
will you be meeting on Saturday with the Spanish speaking group?
Yes.
At what time?
At 1.
Okay. And could you send me the
what?
The information to go in and listen?
Well, we'll just be meeting Saturdays at 1.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be sending out the email to remind people we'll be starting the 1st of January.
Okay.
It's in Spanish.
I know. So that's what you told me before. I need to learn Spanish. So I figured this was a good opportunity to learn Spanish and stuff, to learn more than I learned in high school and college.
Yeah. Anyway, well, again, I like I said, this is my last English teaching. I thank you all who have supported our videos during this time. Again, I'm not going anywhere. I'm here. I'm a phone call away if anybody has a question or any discussion about anything. But starting January 1st, we'll be doing only Spanish services, Fridays and Saturdays here at the congregation. And Saturday, starting the 1st of January, we'll be meeting at 1 to do the Mincha, Shabbat prayers, and then we'll do studies of the Haftarah and apostolic writings associated with the Torah portion. And there will be no Zoom, no recording. Whoever wants to participate has to be here. Okay.
So what are you going to do with the people that are in Haiti? I mean, that are in Panama and places like that?
It's Friday nights. Friday nights I continue with Zoom, but not Saturdays.
Okay.
Saturdays is an in-house thing.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. Be blessed. Enjoy the rest of your Shabbat, and I'll see you guys sometime.
Okay, thank you.
Shalom, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.